Welcome back, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a show for you today. We're going to be talking about the winter blues a little bit and understanding what that's all about with someone who is near and dear to my heart, my nephew, Chris Davis. You might see the resemblance once he's brought back up on stage. But in the meantime, I want you to buckle up because we are here, Life Uncensored, navigating adulthood one episode at a time, and Chris is riding shotgun. Chris Davis is a fourth year PhD candidate at Cornell University with a focus in developmental psychopathology. His research mainly focuses on the role of cognitive processes in the development and maintenance of psychopathology. Prior to his work at Cornell, Chris received his Master's of Science in both clinical mental health counseling from Johns Hopkins University and human development from Harvard University. Chris hopes to use his research to further our collective understanding of psychopathology in hopes of reducing the impact of mental health disorders on individuals and families. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, my nephew, Chris Davis.
What's up, Auntie? How's everything?
Hey, Chris. Hey, Chris. This is my
I don't know.
nephew, y'all.
I don't know if you noticed, but us having the podcast today is especially cool because it's Grandma's birthday.
It's grandma's birthday. It's my mama's birthday, y'all. Happy heavenly birthday to my mama, Tony Davis.
Yeah, she's probably looking down like, all right, I'm
I
proud of
know she's proud. I know she's proud. Chris, you have done a lot. You've been a lot of places, you've seen a lot of things, you've done a lot of talks. I want you to kind of introduce yourself to the audience and talk about what inspired you to go into this field.
you. Yeah, so um, just pure curiosity, really. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I was an undergrad. To be honest, I thought I wasn't even going to finish undergrad because I'm going to be famous before undergrad is over. So I'm just doing this for now. But I got super interested in like why we do the things we do. It was like a puzzle that could never be solved. And I thought that I could get closer to solving the puzzle. And then the more I did it, the more I learned about it, the more I realized this puzzle is never going to be solved. But the catch 22 is that, I'll be able to work on this puzzle for the rest of my life. And
Mm.
it's so interesting that like no day ever feels like work. It always feels like I'm doing something that I really like, and that's like the best thing ever.
Learning something new every day, doing something new.
Yeah,
And you've been around the world. Talk about your last few ventures on your speaking engagements.
yeah. So this year's been pretty busy. I went to Cyprus to do some academic talks. While I was there on that trip, I was able to also go to Switzerland and Germany. And I'm also going to Denver, Colorado sometime this year to do another talk at a conference. Um, so that is the cool thing about research. If anyone ever thinks about possibly getting into research, just know that you can travel the world talking about the thing that you work on all the time. And
Mm,
the best part is it's usually free. I didn't have to pay any money for any of these trips because
nice.
the school wants you to do this, do these talks because you're actually, giving them recognition. It's
Mhm.
like, people be like, oh, cool stuff is going on at Cornell. And, I get to travel, talk about the stuff I'm doing. And, when I was in Cyprus, I presented one day for maybe an hour and I got to stay there for a whole week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was
Wow.
great.
See, you guys, did I say that's my nephew? Yeah, that's my nephew. Well, we're going to jump into it. Today's topic is specifically going to be about what some people might call winter depression or the winter blues. We're going to talk a little bit. Well, we're going to talk a lot a bit about that, and then a little bit about some other topics. So I want to just dive right in, um, and just get your feedback and your thoughts. My goal for today is to bring a little bit of awareness, define a couple of things because, with internet doctors, everybody has a diagnosis for stuff, but doesn't really, a lot of people don't really understand the nuances or the exacts. And I really want to delve into that and spread that awareness. And then, quite frankly, I myself, I suffer from the winter blues. Pretty much can tell when it's on set, and when it's starting to die down. And I, over the years, started realizing that's what it was. After talking to some medical professionals and whatnot, and so now I know how to, I'm air quoting, combat those blues when
Mhm.
start to happen. So let's talk about that. Winter blues or seasonal depression, as some people might call it, is something that a lot of folks struggle with. What are some key signs that people should or can watch out for, and how can you differentiate that very real thing, um, from, oh, I'm just having a bad couple of days. It's just been a rough week or whatever.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. A lot of people think that the winter blues is just like a made up thing, or they might feel down in the winter and think like it's just normal. Like people aren't going to feel as happy in the winter than they are in the summer. And some of that is true, but to your extent, there is a diagnosable disorder that tracks to the winter blues. It's called seasonal affective disorder. And seasonal affective disorder, you can think about it as an uptick in typical depressive symptoms when either the fall or the winter comes around. Some of the main criteria for that, so the main characteristics are, depressed mood. So people who might just kind of feel down, feel like pessimistic, not really looking very hopeful for things. You'll also see, instead of insomnia, you might see hypersomnia. That's a common characteristic where people just sleep a lot more. And even after they sleep well, they might have, they might still feel sleepy and tired and kind of, lethargic. You'll also see things like social isolation. In the wintertime, some people experiencing the winter blues might kind of duck away from their social connections or their family. And then just kind of this lack of perpetual motivation.
Hmm.
Yeah, you brought up a good point when you said, what if I'm just having a rough few days? So a diagnostic criteria for seasonal affective disorder, according to the DSM, is that you have this feeling for uh, more than a few times a week. So I think about 3 or 4 times per week at least, for most of the season. But here's the thing: it has to happen for multiple winters or falls. So
Mm,
if you have it one year, we can say that you have symptoms of seasonal affective disorder. But if you want to meet criteria for diagnosis, we want to see if that pattern carries on multiple years.
okay. So let's backtrack a little bit. You use the term DSM. Explain to the
Oh,
audience what that is.
yes. So the DSM is basically like the the handbook, the rule book for clinicians, for mental health clinicians. It's kind of like our Bible, not to be sacrilegious. This is the only criteria in which you can diagnose people with a disorder. So I
Hmm.
can't just see you and say, oh, yes, you have blank. Even though I might know, it has to meet the criteria in
Okay.
order for me to make a good prediction of that.
Okay. Now, does it have to meet the criteria line for line, or is it, 5 out of the 6 criteria, or something like that?
Exactly. So some things are line for line. You'll
Okay.
see that more with a lot of the high acuity or more severe mental disorders.
Okay.
However, most of them say like, you need at least 3 things out of this list, and it has to
Okay.
be occurring for X amount of time.
Got you. Okay. Got it.
If you're ever interested in looking up diagnostic criteria, you can go online and just search what's the DSM criteria for blank. Um,
Ah.
yeah, yeah. It's important not to try to diagnose yourself based on that though. Uh,
Absolutely.
if you think that you might have, something, it's better for a clinician to go through the DSM and say, okay, yeah, it seems like this, even though we're pretty good reporters of ourselves sometimes.
Gotcha. But having a little bit of that background information and then calling up your doctor, making them put
Exactly.
in, I read up on this, or I realize I have this, and this going on. What are you thinking? That,
E-
but at least coming there with those thoughts in mind, because they're going to ask you anyway, those same questions, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And the reason why it's so important to also consult with your clinician is because a lot of things that are actually parts of mental health disorders, they're things that just occur in humans, just period. Right. So things, if you go down the diagnostic criteria for depression, you might see restlessness, you might see agitation, you might see low energy. I mean, everyone in the world has experienced that at some point.
Right. Right.
So, it's up for the clinician to look at how these cluster over time and if it's impairing to well being or impairing to what your daily functioning in order to diagnose that.
Got you. Okay. So you talked a little bit about some of the signs would be like withdrawing from activities, friends, family, things like that. So knowing that the winter itself kind of is like brings on self isolation anyway, because it's
Yeah,
cold, you don't want to deal with the weather, especially depending on where you live, right? Like where I'm at in Virginia, there's a whole lot of snowfall. It is blistering, gusty winds, stuff like that. Nobody wants to go outside when it's like that.
for sure.
So when you know that that's happening, that's one thing, right? That can just be situational. But how can someone combat the sense of loneliness that often accompanies the season and those situational circumstances?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're pointing out something pretty important, this cascading effect that occurs, right? So you might not, it might not be the case that you're not going outside because you feel isolated, but perpetually not going outside may lead you to be isolated,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of snowballs off of each other in that way. And winter, it has that weird trick. I'll just tell you a quick story. Yesterday, I I had to go outside. I looked at the weather. The first thing I did was look at the weather, and it said it's like 6 degrees, and I was like, okay, that's not horrible. And then it said, but it feels like -19. I was like, oh my god. I just had to go to the store to get something real quick.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I did not want to. I was like, oh, this is going to be terrible. By the time I got back, I realized I forgot something. And I was like, I'm not going back. There's no way I'm going back. So it's kind of like this weird, like forced lack of social isolation because of how, cold it can get sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the cool thing is, and we already kind of have practice with this. If you think about COVID, when we actually did have this forced like quarantine, we found out ways within COVID to still be able to connect with each other,
Mm-hmm.
right? And a lot of those things that we learned through COVID, even us video recording right now, I mean, I'm sure a lot of these ideas came from COVID. We
Mm-hmm.
can still use a lot of those same things.
Right. The
Um,
technology.
the technology, just the use of like group chats. Um, there's a lot of different ways that we can stay connected now that we used to not be able to in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully those can indirectly affect how people deal with seasonal affective disorder.
Gotcha. I'm gonna say, like, personally, it is, not only do I suffer from this, um, and like I said, I only realized it a few short years ago. Um, it's also the month of my, December is my birthday month. Um, my dad, your grandfather's birthday was the day after mine. He's been gone 22 years, going on 23 years. So for a long time, I just thought it was, oh, it's because, I'm not able to spend my birthdays with my dad like I used to anymore. So that's what it is. But then more and more as the years passed, things would come up, other things would come up. And I realized that it was, yes, that was a factor, but it was so much more than that.
Yeah.
And I say that to say, going back to, like, you answering my question about how do you combat that sense of isolation and loneliness. For me, it's very calculated, very, very purposeful. Like, I make sure, like, it's very important to me that I'm with the family for, our traditional Thanksgiving, our traditional, Christmas celebrations. That I have a few friends whose birthdays are also in December. I'm making sure that even if at that time I'm not feeling like it, so to speak, to go celebrate, I make a point to go out and celebrate.
Yeah.
I make a point to celebrate my birthday in some form of fashion, because I realized the times that I didn't do that is when it was at its worst.
Hmm.
Um, so I can say personally, another thing is being purposeful to interact, being purposeful to get out and
Yeah.
do stuff, whatever the stuff is, you know, bear down on some hobbies that you have that maybe you purposely just save for that time frame,
Yeah.
you know. But that's just how I feel personally about it. Would you agree? Like, would you agree with that in any sense?
For sure. I mean, I don't know if you did this through like the advice of any professionals or whatnot, but that's exactly what a mental health professional would assign you to do for like homework, for example. They'll say,
Hmm.
hey, what are things that instead of making winter terrible, what special joys can you spend in the wintertime where you
Hmm.
don't do it any other time besides winter? Because now you're actually pairing something positive with this negative thing. So now you're actually like, you know what? I'm not looking forward to winter, but I got my girls' trip coming up. And it's
Hmm.
always dope when we go on the girls' trip.
Hmm.
It could be something like that. I mean, you also mentioned this intentionality. That's another core facet too. There's this therapeutic modality, which is probably like the gold standard. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy. So CBT. And in CBT, a lot of times what they want you to do is to be intentional and be purposeful with how you're spending your time, with how
Hmm.
your thoughts are connecting to your behaviors and how your behaviors are influencing your thoughts. So in that very tight structure that you mentioned, where you're like, I need to do these things, what you're actually able to do is you're acting in a way that now your thoughts are starting to be more intentional. Your behaviors are following that pattern, and they kind of just build off of each other.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I honestly, when I first talked to my doctor about these feelings, um, and this was my normal practitioner, um, she highly recommended. She said, "Who's your support system?" You know,
Mm-hmm.
she said you need to stay closely connected to your support system, and I took from that all the rest of what I described, and just kind of, and I realized that it's kind of a euphoric feeling for me. So I enjoy it now. So now I'm at a place where I'm not working to do that.
Yeah,
It took a couple of years, but I'm not working to do that. It's just
the habit.
exactly,
Yes, yeah.
exactly.
You also mentioned purpose. And funny enough, my advisor for my program now, his main work is about understanding like the science of purpose,
Mm.
right? So he believes that purpose isn't just this like thing. It isn't just this like fluffy thing that, lives in the clouds, but he believes it's something that is measurable and is something that can be cultivated. And all of his work, basically all of his work shows that when people have this sense of purpose in life, they are more effective.
Mm.
They have better mental health and just more desirable like overall outcome. So the part of purpose that you mentioned as well, I'm sure that adds to it, because one thing that a sense of purpose gives you is it gives you direction. And when you have direction, you have hope for the future. And one of the main features of seasonal affective disorder is that pessimism. And when you have pessimism, you're no longer looking forward to the future. You might just look
Mm.
at you might just look at where you're at as tomorrow's just going to be another day of winter, instead
Mm.
of looking at it like tomorrow is one day closer to something.
Right, right.
Yeah,
I like that. And that's something that I can kind of add to my bag of what I'll call tricks to kind of, especially when it's like a really, really rough. time period because it kind of ebbs and flows for me
Yeah.
throughout the season. Um, but I mean, it took one time for a friend to remind me. Like once I first found out what it was, I think maybe a year or two later, I was like, oh no, I'm just feeling so down. This good thing happened, that good thing happened, all these good things, and I don't know what. And she was like, didn't you say, a couple of years ago, blah blah blah? I was like, light bulb. And ever since then, I hadn't forgotten it, and I actually look forward to it in the sense that I know it's coming. What do I already have on the calendar? Okay, V's birthday is such and such. Okay, Sean's birthday is such and such. Okay, we're gonna be doing this. We're gonna be doing that. All the stuff that kind of helps me get through.
That is like a picture perfect non-clinical way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, what you're doing is you're indirectly affecting these symptoms that are coming down the pipe. You're indirectly affecting them by these other things, by attacking their symptoms pretty much.
Yeah.
And if you're attacking their symptoms, you're kind of taking the legs away. Now,
Yeah.
now it could be the case, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this, but it could be the case that you do all of those things, but sometimes it's still just like, it's not enough. Like some days are particularly hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is the case. But less days are harder than others than what they
Yeah,
once were.
that's good.
Yeah. You know, like you mentioned, when we first started, today is my mama's birthday, right?
Mhm.
We are still very much in the winter months.
Yeah, part
She's
of it, some would say.
right. And she's only been gone 6 years.
Mhm.
Um, so it's like I tell people this all the time, and this is kind of going off subject, but not at the same time.
Mhm.
I've lost both my parents. Losing a parent is rough stuff, but
Mhm.
losing your mama changes you as a person. It
Mhm.
literally changes you as a person. It
Mhm.
changes who you are. And so you add that coupled with the fact that it's her birthday, coupled with the fact that it's the winter months, and I do go through this, the winter blues as we're calling them,
Yeah,
unofficially.
yeah,
Um, it's days like that that make it really, really, really hard.
yeah,
Um, and understand, even with my dad being gone, going on 23 years, it doesn't go away. It gets easier to deal with, but
yeah,
it doesn't go away. And so, um, there have been some years where I'm bubbly and bouncy and everything's great.
yeah,
And then there are other years where I don't want to leave the bed for those few days leading up to or going right after. So I do have those days where it is just really hard and I have to really work to put in the effort. But I am glad to say that there are far less of those types of days than there are of, you know, the easier days to get through it.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, you said a couple interesting things, and this might bring us off track a little bit. But I hope not. If so, I have trust in your editing skills that you could just cut it out and make it but you mentioned, like a big theme of the winter months is loss and change and this feeling that I'm not who I used to be.
Mhm.
There's this other topic that I study, I've published on a decent amount, and it's called derailment. It's this psychological concept that my advisor actually introduced into the literature. And basically, when you think about derailment, you can just think about a person who says, I'm not that person I used to be, right? Now, the interesting thing with derailment is that it predicts bad outcomes or it's associated with bad outcomes.
That's so
So,
true.
increased depression is one of the biggest things. If you search derailment, you'll see a lot of, its relationship with depression. And this idea that the person who you see yourself to be is tightly connected to your mood states is not uncommon. But the
Hmm.
interesting thing is, I'm sure you can think about some people who say, I'm not that person I used to be in a good way,
Absolutely.
and some people who say it in a bad way.
Hmm.
The interesting thing about derailment that I've been trying to understand for years is that either person, both people, equally predictive of depressive symptoms. So if you feel like you are
Oh,
right, so if you feel like you're a different person, but you feel better than that person you used to be, you are still at higher risk for depressive symptoms than someone who feels like they're not who they used to be and they're just, they're worse off.
wow.
Yeah. So with that, if you don't mind, I'll just go a little bit more into that. So I actually ran a clinical trial because I wanted to figure it out. I could not figure it out. At first, I thought it might be the fact that when people with derailment, if they get more stressed out, so when they're in situations of stress, they don't have that internal database where they can say, hey, I've gone through this before, I've done it, I'm good. If they think they're a new person, when they're undergoing stress, they might say like, okay, the old me went through this, but the new me hasn't. I don't know if I can deal with this. And then
Mm.
that causes this cascading downstream effect on depression. But that's not true. That wasn't the case. So I ran this clinical trial where what we tried to do is decrease depressive symptoms by not talking about depression at all. All we did was talk about derailment. And more specifically, what we did was we tried to forcibly make people connect with their past self, right? So they
Mm.
had to draw these connections to who they were rather than the new them.
Okay.
Um, Everyone in this clinical trial, they had a high level of derailment and a high level of depression.
Hmm.
So we had two groups. One group had that intervention where they had to feel more connected to their self. The other group, they just had a intervention where they just talked about just like, what's going on in their daily schedule. And what we found out is that after just 4 weeks, people in our derailment condition, they significantly decreased their depressive symptoms, even though we didn't talk about depression at all. The only thing we did was we had them connect themselves to their past self.
Wow.
And once they did, it's interesting because we saw like all of their responses. So I read some of them. And in the beginning, some people were, they all met criteria for, depression.
Yeah.
And then you read their stuff at the beginning, it was just typical, you know, a typical response that you would see from someone who has depression. And at the end, it was kind of like this transformative thing where they were like, what, I realized that like my life hasn't always been that bad. And if I made it through these things, then I can like keep going.
Hmm.
Again, the interesting thing is we didn't talk about depression, we didn't talk about strength, we didn't say anything positive or negative. We just had them, go back in time, first to like high school, and then to middle school, and then elementary school, and then they had to call one of their loved ones, and then they had to tell them about themselves as a child. And then we asked them, what about you is similar now as then?
Hmm.
And just that was able to decrease depressive symptoms. So I say
Wow.
all of that to bring it back around and say, I think that there could be a connection. I mean, there's no research on this, but it seems like there could be a connection that in the winter months, when we have the winter blues, we are disconnected from our past selves. We're disconnected from, I mean, this sounds a little weird, but our summer self or our more
Mm.
happy, cheery self. We might say, like, what, it hasn't always been like that. I used to be different. Or,
Mm.
before I dealt with these losses, or you know, uh, before I got in this relationship, or before this marriage, I was a different person.
Mm.
I would say that we have strong evidence to support the idea that the more connected you feel to your past self, even if it's just an element, even if you just say, I've always been creative, or I've always loved puzzles, or I've always, been mouthy, and I am still that way. Like that thing that was always here is still here.
Mm. Hmm. I love that. And you're kind of making me go back in the recesses of my mind here. And I kind of feel like that's one of the things that I've been subconsciously, unconsciously, what's the word? Subconsciously doing.
Mhm.
Um, in the sense that I just, or even let's take this week, right? We got this big snow. Zane's been out of school all week. He had 2 weeks for winter break, and then the snow happened. He was supposed to go back Monday. Been out of school for that.
I know
Alex
he's
has been
thrilled.
home. Oh yeah, of course. Alex has been home, because of the snow. Work was out. Clarence has been home because work's been out, stuff like that. Been talking to John, even though he doesn't live here. We've been on FaceTime and playing the game online with John, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm just giddy as a schoolgirl, because it reminds me of being little
Hmm.
when your mom and Joy were older, and we would, on rainy days or cold days, we'd sit home and play games and watch movies, and
Yeah.
so it's like nostalgic to me, and I love it. Like I just,
Yeah.
it's like it's feeding me energy.
Yeah. I would say that's not just a feeling. There's also very good evidence that says our memory, our autobiographical memory, is a bit biased towards us feeling good, right? Now, sometimes, I mean, our memories sometimes are not great,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
However, uh, in autobiographical memory research, there are some researchers who say the further you get from an event or a period of time in your life, the more fondly you remember. You look back on it, right? So,
Hmm.
I mean, think about how you would describe your childhood while you were a child, and think about how you would describe it when you were 20, and think about how you would describe it now,
Hmm.
right? It just gets progressively better.
Hmm.
The reason for that isn't well understood, but it's speculated on. The speculation is, for some, is that uh, our brain can't remember everything, right? It can maybe save the file everywhere, but it can't keep everything on, like, let's just think about a computer hard drive. You
Hmm.
got to prioritize your best files, your most important files there.
Hmm.
So the idea is that your brain is going to try to remember the most important things, but when there's things that are kind of like equal in value, it'll try to remember the good better, because that's better, that's more self-serving. If I'm remembering these good things and it's making me feel better, rather than uh I'll say that there's a caveat. You'll remember the bad things if they're traumatic, right? Because you want to be
Sure.
protected.
If
Your
they're
brain,
significant. Hmm.
exactly, and your brain wants to make sure, like, hey, we need to. This is a red tape area. We're not going past there. But
Hmm.
these other things, when you look back on it, you remember more fondly.
Hmm.
So that's how some people think about it. Other people think that, no, there's this thing called rosy retrospection, where things get fuzzy, after a while. Like, the further you are from an event, the less you remember it, and our brain has to fill more of the gaps in. And
Hmm.
because of that, our brain starts to fill the gaps in with either very good or very bad things, but not necessarily accurate things.
Okay.
Either way, I would argue that doesn't matter. The thing that matters is that it seems like our brain shows a pattern to be biased towards things that'll make us feel better if, everything is equal.
Well, I would even throw onto that perspective, because your perspective as a 10-year-old versus a 20-year-old versus a 40-year-old versus a 60-year-old and so on changes just based on life experiences, whether personal or, you've seen someone else experience that sort of thing. So I would even add that piece of it too, that makes a difference. Like when you're the teenager growing up on Dawson's Creek, I hate my mom, she won't let me go to the party, right?
Uh-huh.
But then when you're 30, you're like, thank God she didn't let me go to that party.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
different.
yeah,
The
yes,
perspective changes.
yeah. It's so interesting too that, like, that insight that we have is, like, it's a typical story, right? Like, most people have that story that you just mentioned, where it's like,
Hmm.
my mom won't let me do anything. I have one of the not cool moms.
Hmm.
And then when people get older, they realize, oh shoot, that might
Hmm.
save me from a lot of stuff.
Hmm.
It's interesting how, like, even though our experiences are different, that's a common, like, fixture in the human experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. I'm sorry. I know I took you off track a little bit, but
No, no,
that
no,
was just
good.
very interesting to me. That
No,
was
this was great. I much prefer, like, the natural riffs, because I think exactly what you said, other people listening might feel.
yeah. Yeah.
And in that case, it's always good to, like, go off of those lived experiences. And
Right.
also, I never get to talk about derailment, so this was awesome.
And it got you a chance to talk about derailment. All right, so let's get us back on track. Let's get us back on track and talk
Okay.
about. So we know that a lot. Well, at least what we've heard slash learned. I'm not a doctor. I have to just play one on TV.
Me-
that that the winter months bring daylight savings time as we know it here in the US at least. So
Mhm.
that means less sunlight, less sun exposure. So talk about how physical activity and or just the exposure to or at least the opportunity to have exposure to sunlight play in managing the seasonal depression or the SAD.
Yeah, great question. So that's probably the biggest thing. One of the it's kind of argued about, right? So we know that vitamin D production, well, vitamin D is synthesized to our bodies from the sun, right? And I mean, our body does a process to be able to absorb it, but we know that. And in the winter, if you don't have as much sun, then you're not going to get as much vitamin D, so you might not feel as good.
Mhm.
However, the research so far shows that clinical patients for SAD, seasonal affective disorder, they're not necessarily vitamin D deficient when compared to other people. So that right there kind of it seems kind of contradictory, right? You would
Mhm.
think that vitamin D it does have these effects on mood. However, it doesn't seem like vitamin D deficiency itself is uh, is like the driver of seasonal affective
Um,
disorder.
okay. So not necessarily a factor in it directly.
Maybe, but then I'll give you another piece that's a little that makes it even weirder. As you can tell, it understanding seasonal affective disorder is not like it's not like so straightforward. However, the treatments for it are pretty efficacious, which means they work pretty well. One of the most common therapies that either your medical provider, my school also offers it, is light therapy. And have you ever heard of light therapy?
I've heard of it, but I don't necessarily understand
So,
it or know exactly what it entails.
so light therapy literally involves you getting this. You can get it off Amazon. You can get it off of a lot of online sites, but it's basically this light that, and it's a specialized light. If you write like light therapy light, then it'll typically come up. Um, but you sit in it for about 30 minutes a day to start your day. The research shows if you start it around 8 a.m. or when you wake up, it's best. And you don't have to just sit in the light. You can just like be on your phone. You can eat breakfast. You can do whatever. But having about 30 minutes a day of a 10,000 knot light, which attempts to mimic the sun,
Mm.
that has been shown to lead about good outcomes for seasonal affective disorder. Only 30 minutes a day. Um, there are some people who like require less knots. You might get a headache if you have too much. You should always talk to your doctor about that.
Of course.
Or you can also consult like uh, your psychologist or your medical practitioner.
Okay.
Um, but you don't need a prescription to get the light therapy light. Um,
Got you.
Funny enough, I have like a lot of plants in my house, and we sometimes we go 2 weeks without sun here in Ithaca. Um, but I have a plant light,
Mm.
and I didn't know that plant light also, in a way, constitutes that light therapy type of thing.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
um, yeah, so there are different ways that you can go about it. Some are very simple. One is that light therapy.
Hmm.
Um, the other is to try to get out in natural light. I mean,
Of
that
course.
is probably the best thing you can do.
Of course.
Um, so the weird thing is we don't see a vitamin D deficiency amongst SAD clients. However, when people are more out in natural light, their risk for SAD goes down. So I
Mm.
don't understand why that's the case, but I will say, in my opinion, I think sunlight has a big thing to do with it. I don't think that's very controversial. Um,
Gotcha.
So that's one way to do it. And this is
Okay.
especially important for people of color, black and
Mm-hmm.
brown people.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because, we have more melanin. The more melanin you have, the more that you're blocking out UV rays, which, if you think about where a lot of black and brown people are from, that's fine, right? Traditionally, because there's sun all the time.
Right.
I don't need to absorb as much because I'm in it all the time. And if I do absorb as much as lighter folks, then I'm actually going to be at risk for skin cancer because all of these UVs are in me. We don't have that. We have lower absorption of UV lights because of the regions that we're from. So that helps us there. However, a lot of us, for different reasons, are in different locations, right?
Right.
More now than ever because of globalization.
Right.
So it doesn't take like one or two generations for you to biologically adapt to your new surrounding. That can take tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years if you have like similar genetic traits and you're passing them on. We
Gotcha.
don't we, that just doesn't happen. We haven't been here that long. So what you see in the research is that Hispanic and African Americans are reporting higher prevalence rates of SAD compared to their white counterparts.
Wow.
And the thought is it's because of, even if we get the same amount of sunlight in a place that doesn't have as much sun in the winter, it's not going to be absorbed as much as our white counterparts because when you have less melanin, you just absorb everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. No, I didn't know that. That's kind of fascinating actually. So, okay, so what about the physical activity aspect of it?
So the physical activity, that is good because it indirectly affects uh, SAD. Why? Because we know for a fact that physical activity releases endorphins, which are great for your mood. They're great mood stabilizers. They make you feel good. They're called the feel good hormone.
Mhm.
The more endorphins you release, the better your mood is. Also, you're decreasing the risk of like gaining weight in the winter or different medical disorders that might come from a sedentary lifestyle. The more you do that, uh, the better you are to be able to kind of defend or fend off symptoms of SAD. So while it might not directly affect it, it's having these indirect effects on these other areas that might put you in a better position.
Mhm. So it's kind of a twofer in that sense too.
Yeah, for
Right. I
sure.
mean, because people always, you know, attribute the winter weight to the holidays. Oh, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's,
Yeah,
all the stuff, right? The holidays. So it's a twofer if you're keeping up with the physical activity, in that sense, for the endorphins and helping with your weight.
for sure. I mean, another symptom of seasonal affective disorder is craving more carbs and sugars. Like that's like a characteristic. I mean, not
Yeah.
everyone has that, but it's definitely a characteristic. So if you realize that in the wintertime you're going more towards the cookie jar, like
Wow.
yeah, that's actually like documented behavior.
Now I'm gonna have to pay attention to that because I don't know if I do that or not. I mean,
Yeah.
I have a natural sweet. I think we all do. I have a natural sweet tooth,
Mhm.
but I'm gonna have to now pay attention to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, even people without seasonal affective disorder, uh, in the wintertime, our cravings go up for these things. The thought is, an evolutionary psychologist would say this. And the reason why I keep saying these people would say this is because we don't really know. But
Okay,
these are
fair enough.
perspectives held by these experts.
Okay.
So an evolutionary psychologist would say in the wintertime, just think about how bears hibernate or how a lot of animals, they put on weight in the wintertime. Polar bears, for example, they're huge. They're bigger than any other bear because they're in the cold.
Hmm.
So evolutionary psychologists would say once it gets colder out and your body realizes like, okay, this is the cold season, you have to put on weight. And you want to try to put on weight as fast and as effectively as possible. And because of that, also in the wintertime, we shake a lot. We shiver much more uh, because it's cold,
Hmm.
typically. And our body can counteract that with fast acting carbohydrates or simple sugars. So your body will typically crave these things more when you are in a period that needs more caloric density.
Wow. Look
Yeah.
at that.
Right. Yeah. So if anyone ever says like, "Hey, put down the cookies," like, "Yo, this is my body's response to the cold. Just relax."
Leave me alone, doctor. I need the cookies. I need the gummy bears. Talk to me in April.
Yeah, I'll be good in the summer.
Okay. So in the same vein, because you were already starting to touch on that, I was gonna follow that up with the diet and nutrition aspect of it. So there that is.
Yeah. I mean, also going back to our vitamin D conversation, let's say someone is they can't get sun, right? Um, or they can't get as much sun as they need. The cool things about us as humans, we've proliferated the medicine that we need in our everyday life. So, for example, I mean, you can obviously get like supplements to be able to make up for that, but you can also eat vitamin D rich foods, like a natural source of vitamin D. So, fatty fish like salmon, for example, are super rich in vitamin D. If I'm not mistaken, kale is super rich in iron, vitamin D. Uh, but just making sure that our vitamins and mineral requirement is met is probably also very important to fending off some of the symptoms of the winter blues.
Mm, okay. So I'm going to ask you this, and then we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
Someone who may not, and I say this term, I use this term loosely, but somebody who may not experience the full blown effects of seasonal affective disorder,
Mm-hmm.
but they still feel pretty low in the winter. Um, what are just some like really small, manageable changes that they can make to make themselves feel better?
Yeah. I mean, I want to go back to what you said about, like your intentionality. I think that is one of the main things in our power to be able to
Mm,
do. And the best part is we can individualize what that intentionality looks like. Like yours might be, I have this intention where I'm going to be connected to my people because
mhm,
that will keep me where I need to go. Someone else's might be, hey, you know what? I want to be able to look forward to the summer, so I'm going to get my 10,000 steps in, even if I got to walk around in circles, because then in the summer I'm gonna be able to, be able to wear whatever I want or
mhm,
however little I want.
mhm.
And whatever that goal is that you have, or whatever that process is that you want to set intention to, I think that's a very big way to instill hope in a time that might feel a little hopeless. And it has
Yeah.
you looking further ahead. It has you looking towards, past these winter months. And that
Yeah.
might be able to, help you get through it.
Got you. I like that. I
Yeah.
like that. Chris, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and finish up this conversation. I um, got to make sure we get some bills paid, right? So, in about a minute and a half, we will be back with Chris Davis, researcher and PhD candidate.
What's up, guys? It's the Misfit, and I'm back now debuting my backpack drop. Hey, what's up, guys? If you're ready to get your backpacks, you can go on the misfitllc.net/shop, or you could DM me. I do DMV deliveries. Drop-offs are always available, so let me know.
Take charge of your financial future with our interactive workbooks, The Basics of Financial Literacy, A Healthy Money Mindset, and The Basics of Financial Literacy, A Healthy Money Mindset for Teens and Young Adults. Now available on Amazon. Dive into practical exercises and start building a solid financial foundation today.
Life Uncensored, navigating adulthood one episode at a time. We're available on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
You can also check us out on our website, life-uncensored.com. Come on over and see what you've been missing.
We are back. We're talking with Chris Davis, and we're talking about getting to understand winter depression or seasonal depression, more formally known as seasonal affective disorder, with him. And he's given us some great tips, tricks, and insights on what that all entails. Chris, thank you. Welcome back.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, since I'm a guest on your show, do I get some merch?
Yeah.
Okay.
You just got to say the word.
Cool.
Check those guidelines I sent you.
Okay. See, you don't know this, but I was thinking, when you came back, I was like, all right, if she says no to the merch, I'm going to play hardball and just not say anything for the rest of the time.
And you know that I can talk enough for the both of us, so.
Dang.
See, this is my nephew, y'all. Did I say that already? This is my nephew. So let's talk. We've talked about what seasonal affective disorder is. We've talked about small ways to combat it, so to speak. We've talked about diet, exercise, and things like that. Let's talk about support. What are some ways that friends and family can help support somebody who suffers from SAD or who struggle with it during that time period?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the best support is always for whatever mental disorder, for any mood disorder, so like depression, major depression, seasonal affective disorder, things of that nature. It's good for the support system to see what the person needs, right? So instead of saying like, oh, you know what, they need to get out the house, I'm going to get them out the house, right? While that might actually, that is something that would help, if the person is not receptive to that, then it might actually cause the inverse effect. So the first thing to do is always, even if you feel like you know the right thing, always be in tandem with that person and let them lead the ship. Even if you're like guiding the steering wheel, let them lead the ship, because that is the start of more actionable and a habit that is actually going to stick. So that's one. But let's just say the person is receptive to everything. It would be very beneficial if you say, hey, if you want to go walk out, if you want to go maybe walk a half mile, walk a mile, whatever, I'll bundle up and we can do this together. Or if they want to walk and you just want to be on the phone with them. There are different things. If they want to get on the treadmill and you want to be on the phone with them. There's different things specific to the person that you want to help. Like you mentioned, how the social connection is important, but the connection in the sense of we're doing things together or we're able to commune in these different ways. So for you, someone in your social support system would maybe reach out every now and then, text, hey, how's it going? You got time for a call? Or, hey, I'm on the game. You want to hop on and play for a little bit? Like, to you, that will probably be very beneficial. To someone else, it might just be more beneficial if you just sent a text like, hey, hit me up whenever. Because then that person might just know, like, oh, I got Auntie Amanda, I got these people. Like, if I need to reach out, that feels good. I feel kind of like protected.
Right. There's definitely a difference between what the extrovert might want / need versus the introvert.
For sure.
In that sense.
Sure. Yeah. 1,000,000,000%. And it's also good to like have these conversations where you're able to destigmatize it. There's some people that I'm sure there's some things I told you today that are like kind of common that we see in the literature that you're like, okay, so I'm not as abnormal. It's not just me. And sometimes that can make people like explore it more, possibly, seek treatment or possibly do these little things that can actually have these lasting impacts.
Yeah, in a good way. Yeah.
In a great way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So these destigmatizing conversations are also really, really good. I mean, to be honest, I didn't know anything about. I mean, Maryland doesn't get that cold, right? And then in undergrad, I was in Florida, so it didn't really get cold until I came to Ithaca. You know, people told me before I came here, they were like, "It's rough in the winter." Like,
Mm.
and I was like, "Man, I was in Boston before. I'm good." No,
It's not the
no,
same.
this is different, right? And once I was here, I understood what people meant when they say like, "Hey, yeah, like I'm feeling down. I haven't seen the sun in days."
Yeah.
And you know, the funny story. The first time it was so bad here my first year. I got mad at the weather. Like, like I was walking from my office probably like 2 a.m. right, and I was walking to my car, and it's not that long to walk from my office to my car, but the wind was howling. It was slapping me in the face, and it was like -8 degrees. And I would
Hmm.
walk like into the wind, and this is before I had like this is before I had a real winter coat.
Oh my gosh.
'Cause in Maryland,
Y'all, I want y'all to know Chris used to walk around in this jacket talking about something he got a coat on. It was a jacket. It was like a windbreaker. Like
nah, I mean for real. Basically, but look, so I was walking in that, I had my hands in my pocket, and I was like, this ain't even funny no more. And then I was thinking in my head, wait, why did I just say that? I'm talking to the weather right now. I'm
right, like
mad
who are you
at the
talking
weather.
to?
Yeah. But it was March. It was March. I was like, why is this still happening?
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I think going back to what we're saying, being able to destigmatize it by talking about your own experiences
Yeah,
helps a lot.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's therapeutic, in its own way.
Yeah.
Um, and especially in a case where it's not somebody saying, "Oh, that happens to everybody."
Right.
It's not really, not in the same way. Not that it doesn't, but not in the same way. The effects are different.
Right.
Um, but it is therapeutic, And like I said, when I mentioned earlier, shout out to Vanetta. You know, when I first realized what was going on, a year or two in, and I was like, "Dang, what's going on? I don't know why I've been so down lately." And she was like, "Wait a minute," because my circle is tight in the sense that we pay attention to each other. We know each
Yeah.
other's cues and we remember things. We listen. And so when she said that, having that support, because that was what I would call support, a form of support,
Sure.
her reminding me of that was enough to help me get through. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely having someone to talk through it with, walk through it with you. In some cases, like you said, I love what you said about, like, hey, I'll take a walk with you. I'll battle that cold with you for half hour, 45 minutes, like that sort of thing. It could really make a difference.
Yeah, for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, just think about the next winter, if you and your homie, y'all did the code together. And when y'all reflect on it, y'all aren't going to be like, we were miserable. It was terrible. It
Hmm.
could have been terrible, and you might have been miserable, but y'all going to remember. Y'all going to think about it like, yo, remember what we was doing? Blah blah blah. That's
Hmm.
crazy.
Remember when your wig blew off?
But now those are fond
Now it's
memories.
a funny story. Yeah.
It's a funny story, and then when the next winter comes, you have that funny story, and then you can say, "Hey, we doing this again?"
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
building those habits, like you said, they have this cascading effect that can carry on into the next season and the next season.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You I'm sorry, but you literally just reminded me of something. I was talking to Reggie, brother Reggie, not
Uh,
nephew Reggie, about like a week or two ago. And he was talking about the time I called him up fussing and cussing about something that had happened. And I'm like, "Oh, you better, we're cracking up now." Obviously, at the time, I was
yeah,
on 11,
yeah,
but we're cracking. I mean, like tears rolling, cracking up, laughing at it now. Like he's like, and I'm trying to hurry up and get out the bed because it's the middle of the night, and you screaming and hollering and cussing, and we're laughing and joking about
yeah,
it. So, to your point, to illustrate your point even further, something that may not have been necessarily comfortable at the time causes a
for
funny
sure,
memory, a fond memory later on.
for sure, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah,
yeah. I love that. I love it. Okay, so what are some very practical steps
Uh-huh.
outside of these things we just talked about? Some very practical steps. Anybody, even if it's someone who doesn't necessarily suffer from seasonal affective disorder, that people can take just to make sure that their mental health is steady
Yeah.
throughout the winter months. What are some practical things people can do?
I think the practical things are more proactive, right? So move around. Make sure you move around because we know that a sedentary lifestyle indirectly affects mood and mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So move around. Attempt the best way to do so. When I said the 10,000 steps earlier, I mean a lot of researchers say that the best thing one of the lower level best things you can do for your physical health is get your steps in. Like that has a very good association with weight regulation and also mood regulation. So getting those steps in is very a practical way to be able to do it. Making sure you have a balanced diet, but don't torture yourself. Like be able to eat the
Right.
things you want to eat.
Right.
Um, Make sure that you try to spend out some time in the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's cold, or even if like right now I'm at a big window.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you want to sit at a window and do some work, or if you're usually on your phone in your room, open up the blinds, try to get some sunlight, because even if it's a cloudy day, I mean, you're still able to
The sun
get.
is still up.
It's still out and it's
Mm-hmm.
still shining. We might not see it as well, but it still has the same. Well, not the same. It has less intense effects, but it still has effects.
Got you. Got you.
Yeah, and
And
then
that's all simple and free. All the things you
simple
just
and free,
mentioned.
simple and free, and maintaining the level of social connection that you want.
Yeah.
That might have to mean that you reach out to your people beforehand and say, like, hey, I'm gonna be bugging you this winter. Just letting you know, like, what's a good amount of time that I can bug you? When is a good time to bug you? Build that schedule, and
Mm-hmm.
now it's gonna start being a habit, and you don't have to worry about the winter blues sneaking up on you because you kind of
Yeah.
have this fortified defense that you can do every year for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those are great tips. Great tips. So we've talked about a whole lot as it pertains to winter depression or seasonal depression. I want to do a quick vocab lesson, so to speak,
Okay.
because there's a lot of terms floating around out here that are um, being used, number one, interchangeably, number two, sometimes incorrectly, number
Mhm.
three, without the full understanding. Internet, like I said, you've got the internet doctors and therapists and whatnot that are quick to throw out, because somebody said no, you can't borrow a dollar. Oh, you're a narcissist. Now that's the buzzword now.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I
Right.
want to I want to have like a quick, just a few words, a few phrases,
Okay.
mental health vocabulary lesson for the audience here. So I want to start
This is
out.
cool.
Yeah. Let's start with the outside of narcissist or narcissism. What I've
Yeah.
been hearing a lot is imposter syndrome.
Oh yeah.
Give us a quick vocab on a definition and what that looks like.
Yeah. So imposter syndrome. I mean, I'm personally interested in imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome has to do with when someone, they might have an accomplishment, they might have a skill or an ability, and they don't attribute anything that comes from that to themselves. They typically attribute it to luck, or they attribute it to someone did something for them, or somebody felt bad for them. That's how it happened. Uh,
Hmm.
and one of the main characteristics of imposter syndrome is the fear of being figured out, right? The fear that someone is going to see that you're not as smart as they thought, or they're going to see that you're not as, capable as they thought. And typically, that fear is the thing that underpins the imposter syndrome. It's not a diagnosable disorder. It's
Okay.
this phenomenon, but it's so commonly experienced. I'll just go off for just a couple seconds. I thought that, so I definitely had imposter syndrome when I was moving about these different spaces. And it wasn't until maybe a couple years ago that I no longer have that. That I don't think that I have that any longer. And it's because every step that I took, people kept saying, you do good work, and I would be pretty good at what I did. And I would just think in my head, maybe they just don't understand what I'm doing. Or maybe and these are people who have been experts in this for 40 years. I'm like, maybe they just don't understand this area too well. Or maybe there has to be something.
Wow.
And then at some point, something just crystallizes where you're like, oh, maybe I'm just fire, right? And then once you realize that, you start to look around, and then you see imposter syndrome is so common. It's not just underrepresented folks in areas. I thought I had imposter syndrome because I was a Black dude in a PhD program in an Ivy League school. For example, the school I'm in now, when I graduate, I'll be the first African American male to graduate with a PhD in my department, which seems crazy, which seems insane. But
That's my nephew. That's my nephew.
There's another Black dude in the department too, though. We're battling to see who gets it first. So trying to pull ahead. But at first I thought that's what it was. However, a lot of my RAs, they are rich, they're not minorities, and they come from like the best of places, and even they struggle with imposter syndrome. And I was like, okay, this is weird. So I was like, maybe it's just them. I conducted a study where I just wanted to see the association between race, SES, so socioeconomic status, gender, and imposter syndrome. And surprisingly, it's very similar across races, across genders, across socioeconomic statuses, where people feel a similar amount of imposter syndrome.
Yeah. So what is it? Is it the same as somebody who's like, oh, I keep being told I'm so great at my job, I'm so smart in school, blah blah blah, but that person's smarter than me, or that person knows more than me, or that person has more experience than me, and they're going to find out that I'm not as smart as them or as good as them. Is that the same thing?
Yes. So it's the same. The first part you mentioned is a different construct called upward social comparison, right? So upward social comparison is when you look up and you say that person's better than me. Downward social comparison is when you look down and you say I'm better than that person.
Okay.
Right. So it sounds like what you're explaining is imposter syndrome that is causing or that may lead to upward social comparison in order to reinforce that imposter syndrome.
Wow. So it's like a big circle.
Exactly. So basically, I think that I'm not that great, even though people tell me that. And my evidence is that this person is way better. And then once these people figure out I'm not as good as that person, then they're going to see me as the fraud that I am. Imposter syndrome, upward social comparison, back to imposter syndrome.
And it's not that I'm a fraud. It's just that how I'm feeling about it.
Yeah.
I do know the stuff that I know. I am good at the stuff I'm good at, so on and so forth. But I feel like I'll feel like a fraud if the smarter person, the better person, the more experienced person sees that.
It's my guess that the reason for imposter syndrome may be like an awry way of being adaptive to failure. So, or protecting yourself from, impending failure. So I think that people who have imposter syndrome, they probably also have experienced failure. I mean, we all have, right?
Sure.
But our brain tries to protect us from failure in different ways. So some people's brain tries to protect them from failure by planning out every possible scenario and understanding every single thing that could happen, right? That cognition is typical of people with anxiety disorders.
Okay.
Some other people, they do this thing called a strategic withdrawal of effort, right? So basically, think about the kid in class who probably had trouble reading, and then we're doing popcorn reading. So that kid tries to make a joke, so he gets kicked out of class, right? He's protecting himself by making sure he, does this thing to get kicked out, so he doesn't have to put the effort in reading. I think imposter syndrome might be something similar. where imposter syndrome might be the case for people who are actually doing something. So like your job, or you're trying to get into school or something like that, and you in your mind think that there's a chance that you will fail. So I think imposter syndrome is a way for our mind to kind of slowly like make the bed of, if you fail, it's okay because it was expected. Like it's making us contend with this thing. But
Uh-huh.
there's no evidence behind that, to my knowledge. There possibly could be, but that's what I think is going on.
If you expect the worst, you can't be disappointed.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. So if I
Okay.
expect that people are either that or a hypervigilance, I want to make sure people don't figure me out to be a fraud. So I have to do all of these extra things so I'm not figured out.
Again, even though I'm not a fraud, that's
Exactly.
just a me thing.
Exactly.
Got
Exactly.
you. So to be clear, imposter syndrome has nothing to do with people who think that they're better or feel that they're better or superior. It's more of an inferiority.
Exactly.
Okay. Next, next vocab. Trauma response. I'm hearing that a lot floating around the internet.
Yeah. So a trauma response is behavioral, cognitive, emotional, or even physiological response to a traumatic event or series of events. So a trauma response, remember when 9/11 happened, for example, there was a lot of people who experienced this thing called vicarious trauma by seeing it on TV. And then when there was this phenomenon happening, I don't remember it because I was young, but I read about it. There was this phenomenon happening where people, when they saw planes flying a little lower than usual, they would have this trauma response, right? Like I remember there was a story about a car accident on the highway, and the person mentioned that they saw a plane go. I think it was in our area too, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm.
But they saw a plane going pretty low over the highway. Remember, the airport's right there,
Mm-hmm.
and that the plane was just landing. I wouldn't be surprised if that person just never really paid attention to the fact that planes probably do that in that area.
Right.
But once
Right.
9/11 happened, the trauma response caused these emotional, cognitive, behavioral, and possibly physiological responses to seeing that plane and
Mhm.
thinking what could happen.
Like you're hyper aware of something that once before was just background noise, so to speak.
Exactly.
Mm.
Exactly.
Mm.
Hyper aware and hyper vigilant.
Mm. Okay. So I'm going to ask you, and I'm laughing. It's not funny, but it's really hilarious.
Okay.
Is is and I want to make sure that it makes sense out loud the way I'm thinking it in my head. Someone who is very diligent about, you know, planning things, being organized, being punctual, someone who takes pride in that sort of behavior. Is it fair to call that or to say that, oh, you're like this because of trauma response?
I mean, no, not with only that context. Um,
Yes, which is why I put it that way on purpose. Just that
another
information.
another common thing that people say with that is, "Oh, you're so OCD," right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
When again, like I mentioned earlier, there's some characteristics in every mental health disorder that we've all experienced at least once,
Sure.
right? And for the most part, and just because certain things are characteristic of a disorder does not mean that if these people do it in isolation, they have that disorder. If that was the case, we would all have everything.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it could be perhaps a trauma response, but you would need much, much more information to know that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that I've, at least in my experience, when have seen people or heard people say that it's in response to someone doing something that they don't do. Oh,
Yeah,
you're always on time. Oh, you're always gotta plan out things. Oh, you plan ahead, blah, 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 as the examples. That's because of trauma response. No, it's because you are the most disorganized person on the face of the earth. And you never show up to anything on time,
yeah,
and your bills ain't paid on time, and all the things. Like you're the
yeah,
exact opposite. So that person is, and I don't, and not necessarily in a derogatory way saying that,
yeah,
but saying, well, you look at me differently as the disorganized person because of your trauma response.
yeah, yeah,
And that's
yeah.
how you're dealing with it. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So I wanted to kind of, so to speak, debunk that
Yeah. I mean,
theory.
now that you gave it more context, it could also be this phenomenon called uh, vicarious learning, where you might see other people be disorganized and run amok in life, and you're like, "Oh, I don't want to be that." Right? So
Mm-hmm.
no trauma happened, but I
Mm-hmm.
see that thing, and I'm like, "That looks stressful. I don't want to do that."
Uh-huh.
It could be that. I mean, it could all.
Me, that's me.
Yeah.
As the youngest child, that's what I've all my life have done. I see what's happening. I ain't gonna do that. Mama's hand hurt. Mm-mm, mm-mm. Or whatever the thing was. I've always taken note, always been observant and taken note of what's going on around me,
Mm,
so I can be like, oh, great idea.
mhm.
No, bad idea. Do the
Yeah.
opposite or whatever. So I know for a fact that I'm that type of person.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're blessed to be that type of person. There's some people who, they got to touch the fire in
Oh
order to
yeah.
know the fire's hot.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my sons is like that. I'm not going to mention which one,
Yeah,
but one of my sons is like that.
you know what to say. Leave Zay out of this.
It ain't Zay. It ain't Zay. Trust me on that one. Okay, so the next one, which I think is a biggie, and it's something that we do plan to talk about in upcoming episodes: sleeping disorder.
Yes. So sleeping disorders are still pretty elusive. I mean, there's psychologists who work on sleeping disorders, but there are also neurologists who work on sleeping disorders.
Yeah.
They have sleep specialists in both fields that work on sleeping disorder. Interestingly, sleeping disorders, there are a classification of disorders uh, that fall under sleep disorders. So some of the most popular is probably like insomnia, narcolepsy, but there's a lot of other ones as well. I think in total about 8 or 9 diagnosable sleeping disorders that some might have, and I mean sleep research is still relatively new. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until I think the 1960s, if I'm not mistaken, that we knew that sleeping corresponded to better health. And then they started like the Sleep Foundation, and from there it just started to be all this research on sleep. So it's still a relatively very young field of research, and because of that, there's a lot to know and a lot to learn about it. Um, but sleeping disorders are diagnosable things that have like mechanisms that we know are underpinning them.
Got you. So let's talk about two hard hitting ones, and very frankly, two that are near and dear to me: insomnia and night terrors. How do some? I think people mistake insomnia very specifically for 1 or 2 nights of bad sleep. Maybe it's time for a
Right.
new mattress. Maybe you don't sleep well in hotels because it's foreign from your home. That's not insomnia at its fullest, in my opinion. Same thing with night terrors. Some people might say, "Oh, I've been having night terrors." Oh, how many of you had? Oh, I had one last year.
Yeah.
What did
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have? You know what I mean?
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about those two very specifically?
Yeah. Those are also two diagnosable disorders. Insomnia deals with not being able to sleep enough, right? So, and to meet criteria for insomnia, if I'm not mistaken, you have to have that difficulty falling asleep at least 4 times a week, possibly three, I think 3 to 4 times per week. And that has to have been going on for at least 3 months consistently. And that has to be marked by, difficulty falling asleep. There are situations where it's called early wake. So you might wake up early, want to go back to sleep, but cannot go back to sleep. You may feel very tired and sluggish because of it. It might impact your daily functioning. Those things are some of the criteria to be met for insomnia. Night terrors, and interestingly, these two can be comorbid, meaning
Yeah.
that they run in tandem sometimes. So night terrors are not just a nightmare. Night terrors and nightmares are very different. Night terrors are, let's just say, nightmares on steroids. You sometimes wake up disoriented. You don't know where you are or what's happening. You can wake up in like a cold sweat or a scream or a big gasp. You might notice your heart beating really fast. You might notice you're trembling. And again, you might still think that you're in that terror. You might not realize like, oh, I'm awake. So those are some telltale signs. And interestingly enough, the thought is that these two might have a reciprocal relationship where night terrors might cause an increase in insomnia, and insomnia might cause disrupted sleep, which can give way to night terrors.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is important to note too, the symptoms of night terrors, once you wake up, it can last from a few seconds to like a few minutes. It typically doesn't happen like very long, like hours, right? But a couple seconds to a couple minutes, if you're having those symptoms, then it's possible that you can meet criteria for night terrors.
Right. And very again, I suffer from both. The other thing about night terrors that I have experienced is, like you said, it can last from just a few seconds, and then you realize, oh my gosh, that was the craziest dream or whatever, to a few minutes. After that few minutes has passed, or whatever that time span passes, and you realize that it was all just a dream, blah, 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 blah. Depending on just the type of person you are in general, it might then lead to the overthinking of, why would I have a dream like that? Well, I didn't eat nothing crazy. All the things that are common things that are said to you when you have a bad dream, a nightmare or whatnot. And so you find yourself, okay, now I'm out of the terror, so to speak. I know I'm out of the terror. I realize that it was all just fabricated in my sleep. But now in my waking life, now I can't, and that might be a couple of days. I can't believe I wonder what that dream was about. Why would I have a dream like that? I haven't seen this person in years. Or it's, like you said, using your word, it snowballs into something else. And
that's what one of the
domino effect on the insomnia.
For sure. And that's why one of the criteria is the impairment to daily functioning. Because like you said, it doesn't just end with that night terror. There's also a lot of like, okay, what the heck was that? Sometimes it can cause a fear of going to sleep the next day, or it can cause just it can cause this idea that, you know what, I'm not going to get good sleep anyway. I'm probably going to wake up and blah, blah, blah. I can go to sleep at like 4, whatever.
Right. Why bother?
Yeah. And then after a while of that compounding, it can start causing issues.
Yeah. You heard it first, guys, right here on Life Uncensored. Our vocabulary lesson, and some of these words that we've been hearing and phrases that we've been hearing that seem to float around very easily with little understanding or knowledge of what they actually mean. So I appreciate you for doing that, Chris. Chris, you have been really, really great. I really, really can't wait to talk with you again and have you back on and talk more about sleeping disorders and how they affect your waking life, your family, your functioning, all of that, because there's so much to talk about as it pertains to sleeping disorders. But in the meantime, I want you to tell the audience how they can stay informed about your latest research or your publications. Are there any platforms they can follow you on? Any channels that they should be following?
Auntie, you're gonna give me a hard time about this. The thing that I'm terrible at, I've always just sucked at, is like the self-promotion part. And I got into academia because I was like, I don't really have to promote like this is good. But now people are like, yo, like you got a website, you got this, you got that. I'm like, no. They're like you got a LinkedIn? I was like, I don't. so
A link what?
why would I do that? But yeah, so that my New Year's resolution is to probably make like a website so I can keep my research and stuff on. Hopefully by the next time we talk, I'll have that.
All right, y'all. He said it on camera.
I'll at least have a LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah. My advisor say, hey, how's people going to get in contact with you? I'm like, get my email.
Okay, so at the very least, I know some of your publications or your articles have been published with the schools, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can shout that out.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I can send you links to some of the articles. And actually some of them will probably be pretty, I mean, a lot of the stuff we talked about now, like things that are useful to your daily life. Yeah. That's what I care about in research. So
okay.
Yeah, I'll definitely send some of that through.
Okay, and I'll make sure to share them with you all, the audience. Yes. Okay, before I let you go and get ready to close out the show, I asked all of my guests the same thing as a final question. Tell us your greatest joy or your favorite quote and why it's your favorite quote.
Oh, man. Okay, I'll answer the greatest joy question with a possibly drawn out analogy. So, do you know like the feeling like when you're sick and you just have this lingering cold and you just wake up one day and you realize you're not sick, but you don't wake up and realize that you're not sick because like anything happened, but because something didn't happen. Like you're able to breathe through your nose and then you're like, oh, this feels great.
Yes.
Right? So I think my greatest joy is realizing that in life, where like my daily life is kind of just like, this is good. Like fireworks don't have to happen for me to be able to enjoy every day. And it wasn't always like that. So that's why I say it's kind of like waking up without the cold when you're used to having a cold.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Chris Davis, 4th-year PhD candidate at Cornell University, right now sitting in Ithaca with all that crazy cold weather and snow and ice and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
My nephew.
Wait, I'm gonna tell you what the feels like is right now.
Yes, tell us.
All right, we're at 20 degrees, which sounds good.
That's like the actual temperature.
Feels like -1. Look at that. It's crazy. This is crazy. I walked outside yesterday. I tried to step in the snow so that like I wouldn't slip on ice. I slipped right in that snow. The snow was
ice.
The snow was ice. I slipped. I was like, I hope nobody's looking out that window. They gonna lose all my cool points.
Well, yeah, we're not feeling like one. We are at 33 degrees here in Manassas Park, Virginia, and it feels like 17. I'm cool with that.
Yeah, for sure. I would kill for 17.
Chris, while I close out the show, I'm gonna ask you to sit tight and hold on with me for a minute. Can you do that?
Yep.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, my nephew, Chris Davis. Thanks so much, Chris.
No problem. Bye, everybody.
All right, everybody. I hope that you got some useful tips and tricks. I hope that you enjoyed the show. Chris gave us a lot of good information, debunked a few theories, gave us a quick vocab lesson. And I really hope that all of you who are like me and out there suffering from seasonal affective disorder takes heed to some of the things that Chris said, and you'll find yourself in a much better place, not only this winter, but winters going forward. In the meantime, stay tuned for our next episode. We're going to be bringing back Nicole Garner, real estate agent extraordinaire, and she's going to be talking to us about investment properties. So That's a must listen. So make sure that you're tuned in for that. Our next show with Nicole Garner. Like, follow, share. Life Uncensored live on Instagram, Life Uncensored on all the other platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, YouTube. Did I say LinkedIn? We're on all of those spaces, so you can catch previous episodes as well as upcoming episodes. If you'd like to be a guest on our show, or you have an idea for a topic for us to talk about, check us out on the website life-uncensored.com. Scroll to the bottom of the page and click on the link to fill out the form. Tell us that you want to be on the show or that you have an idea. Likewise, if you have a service or product you'd like to have advertised on our show, same thing. Go to our website, life-uncensored.com, and drop us a line there. We'd love to have you. We'd love to showcase you. I'm going to end this show, as I always do, with my quote of the day. And it comes from Albert Camus, who is a renowned French philosopher, author, and journalist. And the quote is, "In the middle of winter, I at last discovered that there was in me an invincible summer." And that's how I'm feeling now that I know what's going on with me during the winter months. In me is an invincible summer. All right, everybody, stay warm, stay hydrated, and do something kind for someone. You never know. You might change the world. Until next time.